The Indian Act came about just after Confederation, about 1875, 76. And what it was federal legislation designed as a means of controlling the lives of Indigenous people across Canada. And that Indian Act is probably the oldest piece of legislation in Canada right now. And that's the power in the Act, the Indian Act. And that's why it works to the benefit of Indigenous people when you hear people talking about taxation, right? Exempt from taxes on an Indigenous community, right? And so it's not like people are getting something more than somebody else. It's just kind of, the optics is just a little different. And the Indian Act, like I say, came about 1876. It was arose out of what they called the Gradual Civilization Act.
And what does that mean?
That act meant that Indigenous people across Canada, it was an act to civilize Indigenous people.
So they were making the assumption that they were uncivilized?
That we were uncivilized. So this act was going to, it was the process to civilize Indigenous people. Then it was amended. 2 or 3 acts were brought together and amalgamated into an Indian Act. Now, this Indian Act talked about who can be a Native person. Talked about, you hear the big issue of women losing status when they marry non-Native men. And that was only rectified in, 1985 with Bill C-31. And it even required passes. If I was to leave my First Nation community to go hunting or fishing, I would need a pass from the colonial administration. So they'd give me a pass to leave the community for a week to hunt or a week to fish or whatever. So it controlled all aspects of Indigenous life. Really, it just stripped Indigenous people of their autonomy, right? And they became basically wards of the government.
Yes.
And that act, when they implemented that act, we saw the demise of our traditional governance structure, which is Grand Council, being replaced by a colonial form of administration, chiefs and councils. And again, who fell under the authority of the Indian Act. So the Indian Act, at least to me, this is my opinion, was a crippling piece of legislation. There are some benefits in that were later recognized, I guess. Controlled citizenship. A lot of people don't realize that Indigenous people in Nova Scotia, in Canada, didn't become citizens of this country until 1960 or so. And gave the government right to take children away from families and put them in institutions. So it really wreaked havoc.
Such as residential schools?
Residential schools, yes. So it wreaked havoc on the social structure of Indigenous communities. And that whole traditional kind of governance structure, economic, social, etc., kind of imploded. And Mi'kmaq now are just recovering from 100 years of that, 100 plus years of that.